And we are so excited to be talking with our guy from PFF. He's the lead draft analyst over there, Mike Renner. And Mike, I was talking to you before we started rolling here. For the first time in about a decade now, we are going to talk about quarterbacks in the draft. I cannot wait. The team parted ways with Derek Carr earlier this week, which means now that as we sit here and we prepare for the start of the league year, the Raiders have one quarterback who will be under contract when the league year turns. That's Chase Garbers. So regardless of what the Raiders do at 7, they're going to have to add some talent to this group. So, Mike, let us just start here. It feels like there's a big 3 of guys coming in this class. Bryce Young, C.J. Stroud, Will Levis. Let's just go in order, right? Bryce Young, what do you like? What concerns you?
I like everything but the fact that he's smaller than I am. I'm 6 foot. I'm about 185. That's like the range that Bryce Young is going to come in at. And there's just not the track record of guys at that size that have been consistently great quarterbacks in the NFL. But just like the tape is as good as it gets. It's better, in my opinion, than any of the sub 6-footers or 6 foot and under guys that have come out in recent years, whether that's Tua Tagovailoa, whether that's Baker Mayfield, whether that's Kyler Murray, even dating back to, Russell Wilson, who was the OG in that sort of mold of the smaller guys who just can't see the middle of the field. But if you go check out his page in the PFF draft guide and go look at his heat maps, which is where he targets most, he targets the middle of the field more than he targets the sidelines. And that's kind of the inverse of guys like Kyler Murray, like Russell Wilson. They get knocked for their inability to work that area of the football field and how much that limits their game. Now, are you going to run quick game, 3-step with him and try to where defensive linemen are getting their hands up? No, you'd be crazy to do that. There's stuff you're not going to do with him that you could do with a Will Levis, that you can do with CJ Stroud because they're height. But outside of that, his game is very, very NFL translatable, and it's translated against the best defenses in college football. So big fan of Bryce Young.
So if we were to play the game of like a 1 to 10, and look, I never pretend to be like the X's and O's mastermind or the deep in the tape kind of guy. That's why we bring guys like you on to kind of make me smarter. But, it seems like when you talk to folks around the league, the big knock, like you said, is the size. And it's reality, right? Like this guy isn't going to be 6'4", 6'5". But if you were to kind of scale it out like 1 to 10, how do you rate your concern of the size or lack thereof for Bryce Young?
Probably a 6. It's concerning. And as I said, there are things that just like that height means you cannot do. That just you're going to have to scheme around. Mm-hmm. But then that's like that part, just the height part. But then it's like, what else of his game am I concerned about? There's no other concern. So if that's the one thing, the 6 out of 10 there is the one thing, I think he's going to be a darn good quarterback in the league.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of folks in your mold as well who think he's going to be really, really good come Sunday. Moving on to C.J. Stroud, it seems like the de facto kind of number 2 in the power rankings of the big 3 quarterbacks. Really nice kind of end of the year. C.J. Stroud, what do we like? What are we concerned about, Mike?
I really like the play style. I think it's very NFL translatable when you compare him to the other Ohio State quarterbacks and how they played in that offense. I think there's a reason why he, when he had Jackson Smith and Jigba, that he targeted that slot and over the middle of the field so much more than a guy like Justin Fields did, than a guy like Dwayne Haskins did. It's because I think he sees defenses better than either of those guys did and is able to, understand the space that you can create basically with throwing windows over the middle of the field, whereas those guys were much more vertically oriented, much more. Haskins is more of an underneath passer actually coming out in his own right, where it's just like they weren't winning at the areas that you need to win at to play in the NFL, whereas Stroud is. I think he has NFL caliber arm strength. Is it elite? No. He has an NFL caliber athlete. Is he an elite athlete? No. He's just kind of ticks the boxes that you need to see from the position. And then he went up against Georgia in the playoffs and balled out. The biggest stage, the biggest game of his career. He played a damn near flawless game. So that has to be taken into account because obviously this Georgia defense, not a lot of guys looked as good as he did against that squad. So I think there's a lot to like. It's just, have we kind of seen it without dudes running wide open consistently? Is the only problem, where it's like that Ohio State offense is foolproof in terms of the pass protection that they have. They're going to have 2 maybe first round offensive tackles that he played behind this past season. They're going to have, maybe a day 2 center that he played behind. It was the best O-line in the country just in terms of talent and the pockets that he had to work from. And then the receiving core obviously speaks for itself there at Ohio State. So that's kind of the only thing really holding Stroud back right now is just what's it going to look like when he is under pressure a lot because under pressure performance was not good on tape this past season outside of that Georgia game. Georgia game obviously had a number of big plays, but like the consistency under pressure not there, and it's just going to look vastly different for him at the NFL level and what he's asked to do. So I think he comes with more worries. You said about Bryce Young, the height's the only worry. There's a lot more worries with CJ Stroud, but I think he's a guy who, dating back to high school, people have raved about his personality. People have raved about basically like the leadership. You know, they talk about Jackson Smith and Jigba was instrumental in getting CJ Stroud, play with him in the camp and said, we have to get this guy to Ohio State because of the personality, just because of who he was and how much that matters at the quarterback position. So all those things to like, but I think you can see why, at least I consider him just a tier below a guy like Bryce Young.
Yeah, and I think that as a guy who watched a lot of Oregon football, I am very familiar with that Georgia defense and how silly it can make opposing offenses look. So the fact that CJ Stroud did what he did on a big stage, like you said, I think has to carry a lot of weight. And we talk about the leadership and the intangibles. I'm sure we're going to hear a lot of that in 2 weeks when we go to the Combine and he has a chance to sit down with front offices and get a little more familiar with coaches and GMs and people like that. But rounding out this big three, my Will Levis, this seems to be the guy who is, you either love him, you hate him, you feel some type of way about him. When you take a look at what he does and what he does well, what is that?
He has what he does well, like actually on tape. Everyone's going to rave about his physical ability. He's got strongest arm probably in the class, got a super quick release, really light in his feet, great athlete, like all that stuff that, a lot of the high end guys in the NFL look like. But I do think there are things on his tape that are very good that kind of everyone just mentions the physical tools, but like his pocket presence and his ability to work from tight pockets is as good as it gets in this draft class. Bryce Young, he's good at getting out of tight scenarios, but he doesn't have a lot of throws on his tape. And CJ Stroud, they can like get outside the pocket. They're athletic, but they don't have a lot of throws on their tape where there's a guy bearing down on them, or their tackles are getting walked back, or their guards are getting walked back, and they just have to get it out before they get killed. And it's a strike. 15 to 20 yards down the football field. Levis has a ton of them. It's like he is comfortable working from NFL pockets because he had worse than NFL pockets at Kentucky. And I think he's also comfortable getting through progressions and working kind of NFL offenses that, he played under two different one former NFL offense coordinator, one current NFL offense coordinator. So a lot of the stuff he did will day one in an NFL team not be an issue. Like he knows that stuff down pat. So there is a lot to like on his tape. The accuracy is an issue, consistency is an issue, the touch throws are an issue, but I do think there's a lot more good than bad and a lot more to work with than is kind of being, maybe the narrative around him is that he's trash, that his stats were nothing, that like it's all based off of physical ability. No, there are actual stuff on his tape that I think was very good.
Yeah, and it's so interesting you say that too, because like I said, everyone feels some type of way about Mr. Levis, right? You either love him, you're like, this is this is a guy who's going to be the next insert quarterback name here. He's the next big thing. Or you're like, well, he did it at Kentucky and he wasn't consistent. So it is interesting. It feels like every year, Mike, that there's one or two of these guys that they are so polarizing that people either love them, they hate them. And there's really not a lot of in between. Like, I think he's going to be a solid pro.
Yeah, that's actually a very good point. He is polarizing. No one's just predicting him to be, Kirk Cousins.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone expects that career path for him. So I do think, though, he falls in line with guys like, there's kind of a track record of these guys, right, that get really pooped on, for lack of a better word, by the general public, whether it's Josh Allen, whether it's Daniel Jones, whether it's Justin Herbert to a degree coming out, where it's like they didn't put up good stats, but they're not surrounded by 5 stars at receiver, 5 stars along the offensive line. Like, it's difficult in college football and in the NFL when you don't have talent around you to put up eye-popping stats. It just doesn't happen. And so you have to, it's the beauty of scouting. You have to project what's it going to look like when he does have a good situation. What is it going to look like when he does have time to work in the pocket, when he does have receivers that are open? And with Levis, I think you could just it's very easy to see that very easy to project that because things will get better for him at the next level. He'll have more guys open and better protection than he did at Kentucky. So for him to already be, there were games where it didn't look good. Tennessee, obviously, this past year, most notably. And that's worrisome, but Josh Allen had back-to-back games coming out of Wyoming where he passed for under 100 yards. Justin Herbert went for like 120 and 130 his last 2 collegiate games. I think you remember.
I do remember those. Thank you, Mike.
Like, they weren't great passing performances, but like you're just not going to be able to do so when you don't have the talent that is NFL caliber, when you don't have offensive masterminds calling plays to you. So I think that's the biggest thing with Levis is that you just can see the easy path to improvement with him.
And I think you brought up a great word of, look, at this point of the year, we're all projecting, right? We're giving our best educated guesses on what these guys look like in 24 months, 36 months, 48 months down the road. And so I'll ask you to project a little bit more. Now, we're going into year 2 of Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler. I think that we collectively have learned a lot about what Josh and Dave value, about what is important to them, about what they want in a quarterback going forward. When you look at these big three, Mike, and like which of these three do you think makes the most sense? I mean, take out where the Raiders are picking at 7, just makes the most fit schematically for what Josh McDaniels wants to do on the offensive side of the football?
I've leaned towards CJ Stroud in that conversation. I don't think Bryce Young would necessarily fit because of how they, again, work the middle of the field, not necessarily just work the middle of the field, but like work underneath a little in the middle of the field, which Bryce Young, for as much as he works in the middle of the field, it's like intermediate, deep areas in the middle of the field. You're still not working right behind two, big defensive tackles. So I lean probably Stroud the most, though, because that's where he went to work at Ohio State. I keep going back to the previous year, because obviously his stats were better, played a little bit better when he did have Jackson Smith and Jigba, but it's because that's the style. That's where he wants to target. That's where kind of just his eyes naturally go and where he feels comfortable. And that's, that a lot of quarterbacks that you get into a pattern or you get into like a thought process, like that's where you feel comfortable and that's where you're going to work. And so when Josh McDaniels' offense, it kind of just he fits right in. It can just slot right in, and a lot of the concepts they run, he's going to be very comfortable with out the gate. So that's why I think a guy like CJ Stroud's probably where I think.
And as we sit here today on February 16th, the Raiders hold the number 7 overall pick. And I think, just talking with my buddies, right, as just, the group chat, it's like, it wouldn't surprise me if the Raiders did anything this year, right? 7 is such an interesting spot. They could go up, they could go back. There's so many different routes that the Raiders could go in that first round. But, if they ultimately decide not to go quarterback at number 7, if that's where they end up staying, who are some guys later on in the draft, day 2, day 3, specifically as signal caller, Mike, that you like, that you could see being a fit for what the Raiders want to do on the offensive side of the football?
Yeah, so it's not necessarily like if you don't get a quarterback at number 7, like, or even if you do, straight up, like you don't have depth. You don't have a guy behind him that is even willing to develop. And if you say you do go get a veteran or whatever, you would like to have either somewhere 3rd, 4th, 5th round. You'd still like to add to that position just to have a backup that you're developing throughout the year. So the guy I like a lot in the mid-round conversation, truthfully, I think he pushes a little bit higher than that, is Tanner McKee from Stanford. But that would be, I don't think he makes it to the 3rd round. So you're probably not, if you're, drafting a guy at 7, going to draft one right again in the 2nd round. Or if you're using that 7th overall pick to trade for a quarterback, you're probably not going to turn right around and draft one in the 2nd round. So probably a little bit later on, the guy I'd pinpoint is Aiden O'Connell, the Purdue quarterback, who's another one where it's like the stats weren't great, but Purdue was not supposed to be in the Big Ten championship game this year. They were not a talented football team, but Aiden O'Connell did a lot of putting the team on his back behind, again, a bad offensive line with a receiving core that features one guy who's probably going to play in the league. So I think Aiden O'Connell's the guy that is kind of that NFL-ready signal caller, does a lot of things that you need to do at the next level. And then, again, works the middle of the field really well, works on timing really well, to where if you can get that guy in the 4th round, I think you're happy to have him as a backup going forward.
Yeah, and I think, like we said, man, it's such a unique spot, and I think that Raiders fans, and I know for a fact Raiders fans, are excited for this kind of next chapter, right? And it's just reality where the position has been solidified. You haven't had any questions about it for the past couple of seasons. And now, hey, we get to dive into this world of speculation and guessing and having fun and seeing what makes sense for the next chapter for the Las Vegas Raiders. So it is going to be a lot of fun. There's going to be no shortage of things to discuss, storylines to follow when we're in the Combine in 2 weeks. A whole nother mess of stories I'm sure will come out in the best possible way for us. So it is going to be a lot of fun. But Mike, a busy time of year for you, my friend. Give me 30 seconds of plugs. What do we got cooking at PFF right now?
Yeah, just go get a draft guide. Don't need 30 seconds. Just go get a PFF draft guide. All the guys we talked about, you can find in that draft guide all the breakdowns, the heat maps, like I talked about. So PFF.com, go get one, and it comes with any subscription. Well worth the price. I'm biased, but I think it's well worth the price.
Yes, and I can confirm I am the proud owner, Mike, of a PFF draft guide. In fact, I'm looking at it right now with the fancy cover of Bryce Young on the on page 1 there. But yeah, I mean, truly a wealth of knowledge in there. You know, I always appreciate you and Dave and the guys at PFF for giving us a few minutes of your time. I will see you in Indy. Safe travels out there. It'll be here before we know it. And dude, one of my favorite weeks on the NFL calendar. It does not get any better than the scouting combine in Indy. So we will see you out there. Good luck, my friend, and we'll talk to you soon. All right.
Appreciate it, Eddie. Thanks for having me. Take it easy, man.